What I do is inconsequential. Why I do what I do is I get to shorten people's journeys every day. What I love about our hospitality industry is that it's our mission to make people feel cared for while on their journeys. Together, we'll explore what hospitality means in the built environment, in business, and in our daily lives. I'm Dan Ryan, and this is Defining Hospitality. This podcast is sponsored by Berman Falk Hospitality Group, a design-driven furniture manufacturer who specializes in custom case goods and seating for hotel guest rooms. Today's guest is skilled in design and real estate with over 25 years of industry experience working for companies like Champalimaud Design and Las Vegas Sands Corp. Previously, he co-founded Viterbo Imagination, a boutique design firm based in Portugal, which he ran for 10 years. He was part of Champalimaud's team when they won a string of awards, including 2009's Gold Key winner of Designer of the Year. All of these gave him extensive experience working in Europe and Asia, and he has a very global perspective, both in design and hospitality. He is currently the Vice President of Design at the Irvine Company, based in Newport Beach. Ladies and gentlemen, Bruno Viterbo. Welcome, Bruno.
Hi, Dan. Very pleased to be here.
I'm so pleased to be here. And I think this conversation is a real testament to how important it is to be out there, be at industry events, and be open to saying, hey, how are you? It's been a while. Let's talk. Or in our case, let's have breakfast. It was an impromptu breakfast walking into the show floor at HD Vegas. And it was so good to catch up because we've known each other for probably the better part of a decade or more. And to be able to catch up and hear how we're doing on like a human level, not even in the work world, I just tremendously enjoyed. And it's just always nice when you're walking somewhere to look to your left, look to your right, see who's there, and take a pause and say, hey, what's up? Let's catch up.
Right. Well, and I owe it to you because I was probably very focused on getting to the show and doing what I was doing there. That it was wonderful to have that time with you and to catch up. And and I do want to thank you for bringing me on the podcast. I've listened to your conversations probably since you started, and I've always found them to be very insightful and passionate. And conversation is something that doesn't always happen as much these days as we used to. And it's great just to be on this side of the conversation this time. It's a privilege to be here. So thank you.
I appreciate it very much. And what I will say is this, you'll find, is a very interesting way to communicate, right? Because you and I are going to talk here and share our conversation with the listeners and watchers, but it's very unusual to have like an hour-long conversation and not be interrupted by people saying, hey, sparkling or still? What appetizer would you like? So I love it. It's a real... I don't know, it's just a real deep dive and a very unusual way of being present and focused on the person that's sitting in front of you. So I also thank you for the opportunity and thank you for listening.
Well, I hope everyone enjoys it.
Yes, I'm sure they will. So I guess we talk about hospitality here, but it comes in all different shapes and sizes and experiences. And I would say that even just walking alongside someone, looking to your right and pausing and saying, oh, and making space for me in that moment as we were walking is a form of hospitality and connection, I think, really importantly. And I think what's so wonderful about all these conversations is just understanding the spectrum of what all of the answers and what hospitality means to everyone that I speak with. So let's start with that with you, Bruno. Like, what does hospitality mean to you?
I think all those things are important. I probably come at it from the point of view of design and development, which has been the focus of my career. And not surprisingly, for me, it also starts with people. It also starts with that connection. And I think that hospitality is related to a certain feeling of effortlessness. And I think what we all appreciate in our homes is that it's been over the years sort of molded to our tastes and our needs, and we know where things are. There's a certain comfort to that. And when we go somewhere and that comfort is there too, because we are taken care of. Things come to us without us having to worry too much about them. Then we can really start enjoying the fact of having that time for ourselves, with our family, with our friends. And it's that, that I usually refer to it as the sense of being known. When we start there, and then we also get the design right, then we really have all the ingredients to have a great destination, a great sense of place. And that for me, that's hospitality. I guess that's just the beginning of what I think, and we can further get into it over the course of this conversation.
Well, I love the idea of feeling known, because also just going back to our interpersonal encounter, both on our own missions, but taking that moment and looking to my right, your left, and feeling known and pausing with that and feeling that and having it be just a moment that was like, okay, well, let's open this up and see like how we can pause and kind of lean into that. One of the things on this idea of feeling known, having started in Europe, your career, obviously you're from Portugal, and then coming to the US and then spending so much time and building out so much in Asia and working on so many really amazing Asian projects. How does that idea of feeling known transcend Europe, North America, Asia, and I'm sure you've worked in probably Africa and South America as well. So probably every continent, I would venture a guess, except potentially Antarctica.
I don't know as much about Africa, or I do know South America, but I think the idea of understanding culture has always been really important for me. Regardless of whatever my career is, I was lucky enough to grow up in an environment where there were artists and scientists and people with very different perspectives of life. My parents were always made a great effort to travel as a family and to take me and my sisters to places that they thought were important for us to see at least once in our lifetime, where we can have some connection to history, where we could have some connection with the way people think in different places. And and that was my mother is an interior designer too, and our vacations were always a little bit of fun, culture, and let's go see the newest hotel and the newest restaurant because there's something to learn there. So I sort of very naturally, I guess, without even making the effort, I was exposed to a lot of different places, and I always had a lot of interest in getting to know them better, not just on the surface, what it looks like, but really getting deep into an understanding of how people behave in different places and what matters to them and what appeals to them. And so that has always, I've carried that naturally. And I guess when I sort of brought that into my work as a designer, it sort of very naturally became the foundation of what I do. I try to look deep through what it is that matters to that particular project and the people that it's going to influence. And so I guess naturally I bring that into it. I try not to over intellectualize it too much, but I do think it's an important part of it.
I love how you package that in your curiosity, and you've always kind of wanted to dig deeper and learn about the cultures and the places and the buildings and the physical spaces that you've been working. But looking at your CV and seeing all the places that you've worked and the amazing kind of mentors you've had along your path, from Alexandra, who's just a legend, Champalimaud, the Adelson, Sheldon Adelson and his whole team, and Wing Chao, and now at the Irvine Company, you've had some incredible leaders within our industry and just real estate development in general. Did you come pre-programmed? Oh, it sounds like you came pre-programmed with that curiosity. But how along your career path have working with some of these legends, I mean, all legends, how did that help you refine that and regain your focus and sharpen your tools, so that you can stay on this path and continue to grow and thrive?
It's a great question. I think I've been lucky to have those people being in my journey. I don't think I deliberately looked for them, But once I had the opportunity to have, someone like Alexandra or at Sands, even more than Sheldon Adelson, it was my relationship with Wing Chao, who was the head of design at the time, and an important influence in the company. I think I've used my skills to listen to them, because sometimes those people come in our way, they show up in people's lives. And if you're not open to listening to what you can learn from them and to try to understand their very broad view of the world and what we can do for other people if we have that understanding, I guess it started, to answer your question, with just listening, which making sure that I appreciated everything that I could learn from them and never think that I knew everything I needed to know. I think in my life, in my career, what has changed over time is that I started by thinking that we needed to do a lot, and over time I realized I just need to listen a lot more, and then the doing sort of comes with it. But they all, with them, I learned very different things with everyone. Alexandra is a force of nature, and someone who has an ability to see around the curve, and to focus the people that work with her on the most important things that need to be taken care of. And so that sense of urgency, of priority, allows that the divergence that we all go through in our creative process to become the convergence into executing the project. So, that is something that to this day, I think that firm still has in spades, is that ability to execute with such excellence. And so that obviously elevated my perception of what was important. And then when I worked closely with Wing Chao, with him, it was really about how to expand that view. He brought the sort of the Disney Imagineering point of view to work every day and challenge the team every single time. We're trying to look at things from the point of view of who is experiencing it, and to develop that sort of immersive notion of what design can do for people. Sometimes, we can be cynical about it, and there's a lot about the Disney view, which we know tends to be about the stage setting, and sometimes just creating things that aren't quite there. I guess the physical design that I always cared about, the integrity of good architecture and good design, sometimes is in conflict with that idea. But being challenged to look at everything, whether it's a hotel, a restaurant, any destination where we want people to feel good and spend money, it's so important to have that combination of both, to never forget that whatever they look at, whatever they do, sort of needs to be choreographed. And that was a really, really key learning that I got from working with him.
Okay, I want to talk about those two individually. I've met Wing a couple of times over the past 20 years, and I've met and talked to and been around Alexandra more than he, but not a ton of times. But one thing I can say about Alexandra, and I'm curious to get your perspective because you work more closely with her. There's certain people in this world that I encounter that if you're in a crowded place, it could even be a ballroom, it could be an office, it could be a restaurant. There's a certain type of person, when they walk into a room, the entire energy of the room changes and like kind of lights up the room, and attention, not intentional attention, just shifts towards them. And Alexandra is one of those few magical unicorn of people that I've experienced that with. What do you think it is? Like, I just find I should probably talk to her about it, but like, it's just, I find it so fascinating.
Well, I don't want to presume to know, what it is. I can describe what I have observed, and what I always found so fascinating is, both Alexandra and Wing, to a certain way, have an incredible ability to focus on the moment, on be present, and to pay attention to what people are doing and saying, and then to correlate that to impressions that they've already formed through their experience and their lived experience about the world. And by establishing those parallels continuously in their mind, they're sort of creating a reality around that particular moment they're living in. And we all get sucked into it because it's different from what most people do. It's in the end, I do think it goes back to conversation. They both have a great ability to stay focused on a conversation until it actually gets somewhere, not just, we're saying things because we have to say things. And that's demanding too of people. I think we all feel challenged when we are in the presence of people who need to have that back and forth, that dialogue.
Mm. It seems, I mean, I'll go out on, it also seems like that's design in a way, right? Because design, okay, yeah, it's creating things, but it's really about solving problems or finding solutions to things. And there's a lot of iteration that needs to take place to do that. And I wish in school they would teach design as like a problem solving thing, because it's so all encompassing as far as every course of study and knowledge and philosophy. But I think what you said, what that really resonated with me about Alexandra is that she will be there and be so incredibly present while kind of reshaping what the solution would be in a conversation, in a design challenge, in just entering a room or taking in a place for all that it has. And I think, I don't know, I'm always just so mystified by people that have that ability to command that presence and to be present.
Well, a lot of it I do think comes from conviction. Uh, I do think that in design we are dealing with opinions and taste, and it's not always easy to have those conversations, right? We deal with a multiplicity of stakeholders. It's the owner, it's the project manager, it's the finance person who pays for the project, and everyone has an opinion. Everyone has traveled. Everyone has seen something. Everyone comes at a project from a point of view that is very personal and informed by very unique experiences. And the designer or the person responsible for the creative process has to pull those threads together and make sense of them. Otherwise, we just end up with parallel conversations going on. And when they're able to do that with a conviction that they really believe in their viewpoint, it's incredibly powerful, because then you're sort of getting people to all row in the same direction, to sort of at the same rhythm, to use that sort of analogy. I think in matters of taste, everyone comes at it with a bit of insecurity, and being able to just remove that insecurity and make people believe that what they're being shown and what they're being told makes perfect sense. It's fascinating, because it sort of gets people on board with it, and then everything seems much easier. So I think that that's part of what it is too.
As you're talking, I love thinking about things in spectrums, because on one end you have Champalimaud or Alexandra, like working on the like super luxury, really kind of really drilling down, focusing on that detail. Not to say that at Sands, where the scale is so much bigger, I guess Wing Chao coming from Disney, just these crazy, incredible, mega projects that the scale is so big. And you think about from that smaller attention to detail to this large, incredible, great scale. It seems to me, as you look at that path for you, going now being at the Irvine Company, where I think you mentioned in one way, it was like the Irvine Company thinks about things on a city scale, right? It's like this much bigger than just a hotel or a multifamily unit or a retail or commercial, but like a master plan, much bigger
Neighborhoods.
development and neighborhoods. Yeah. So how do you, like, if you were to walk through your experience from coming to the United States and working with Alexander right from the beginning and focusing on that luxury, and then evolving into your Sands experience with Wing, and now where you are at Irvine, It seems like a very logical progression on that spectrum, right? Am I going out on a limb here?
It's actually great to look back and see that there was a progression. I don't think, we always plan life that way. And I do think that that idea of scale is an important one because I did think about that early on in my life. I had a great experience when I started my company in Portugal, and I did it with my wife. We were co-founders. We worked together. We tried really hard at, with that sort of startup mentality to get started, but it started with the two of us.
Shout out to Jennifer.
Shout out to her. She deserves it. And we eventually grew, and we saw the team becoming you start worrying about other things. It's not just the projects, it's the culture, and how do you keep that sense of excellence while you're trying to bring in people into your organization that are haven't always had the same views as you do, but you kind of need to create that identity, that sense of unity. And so I was, from the beginning, I was really interested in how do things scale up? How do you scale up and still care as much as you do about the things that really matter, and don't forget to think about people, and don't forget to think about the craftsmanship. And so I do think there's a side of me that was always looking for that scale, and that's why when Alexandra approached me and offered me the great opportunity to come and work with her, and I made the decision to close down my business, bring my family to New York, to the US, where I had never done any work. I did not have any single contact. I had some friends, but that was pretty much it. I think I had been once to NeoCon and once to HD because I thought it was so interesting that these big events existed. That the sense of scale was really important for me, and I think that what I brought was an ability to know the importance of certain elements of design. Because in Europe, what is different for interior designers is that um, the scope of work that is generally expected of an interior designer is a little broader. Clients do hand off projects to interior designers where they expect them to essentially do everything. That there isn't the same practice of bringing in art consultants and lighting designers and procurement agents. Is kind of when you hire the interior designer, you expect them to sort of be a project manager of sorts and be on site and oversee construction. And so that had given me a really broad understanding of what the role of the interior designer is, but it was for projects that tended to be on a smaller scale. And when I started working on the larger projects, some of them were sort of very boutique oriented, and there was a lot there that I understood. But every time there was a project that was bigger, that required a bigger team, that required a better understanding of what the owner and the client expected of us, that was really when I lit up. Those were the moments when I felt, okay, I'm learning something new here. How do I use my skill set at a much larger scale and still do a great job, and still bring people along, and still deliver the culture, the strong culture that I think is so key to the success of any design firm and any company. And so because I was looking for those moments, I think I always took them as a step to grow. And so that never stopped, right? And then maybe that's what put me on the path to every time it was a little bigger. The interesting thing about it is that even though the scale of what I was doing always grew, I always had this attachment to be in places where sort of the founder or the owner's name was on the door. And so when when they really care, Alexandra really cared, Sheldon really cared, at the Irvine Company, Donald Bren really cares, even though these companies are behemoths. And because they really care, everyone around them also cares. And I think that that's what makes this sort of growing and still being so focused on the small details make it so interesting.
I like that idea of really cares as it relates to scale, right? So, but as these companies get bigger and bigger and bigger along your career path, um, as a founder, it's hard to care about everything. You obviously have to, and a lot of that I would think that it's kind of building the right team of all these other people that are you have a value alignment with. Um, but as it relates to design, I think, and just selfish and I'm biased here, that those owner founders really care about design because that's the nuance and the secret sauce and like that. I don't know, the chemistry that kind of from a branding, a lived in, a walker. That's the thing that like ties everything together. And design is one way that an owner founder, because that's what other people are walking through, can really connect with their market, their customers, their stakeholders. Am I said that very clumsily and inelegantly. Can you restate that? Because let me know if I'm on the right path, and how would you refine that?
I think a lot of what you said makes a lot of sense. The way I would describe it is, um, I think people that really care tend to be incredibly thoughtful, and reflected. And sometimes, we can't set aside the importance of intuition. Some people just have intuition and others don't. I actually tend to think that that's, what the people that we sometimes call, geniuses, and we have, in our society that really excel. Um, that we know that they're always very committed to their craft, their art, their business, but they have incredible intuition too. They can just see where things are going and are able, in the absence of all the information, when they're faced with the ambiguity, and in the case of interior design and design in general, with you know a lot of different ideas and great thoughts that come along, they're just able to say that this is a better one. I think that's what we should be doing. And I go back to the sense of conviction that I mentioned earlier. That is such a powerful force. It's like a person with conviction in a room. It's like gravity. It just pulls everything there, and it stabilizes. And it doesn't mean that that can't change and evolve, but it just creates this powerful force of keeping people also focused on what they should be doing. It removes the uncertainties. It just makes people feel better about what they're doing, and then they move forward. And I think that that's a lot of what makes that, that sort of presence that we get from certain individuals so key to feeling that emotion that you just described.
I love it, and because what you're making me think of is like in the world of, let's just say, star architects, right? So you have these larger than life architects. They could have a cape on, envision them however you want. Um, many of them I would refer to as uncompromising visionaries, right?
Right.
They have a vision, they're going, but it's like they leave a lot in their wake, right? It could be like a Napoleonic or Julius Caesar kind of thing, right?
Yes. Right.
And that idea, so that's an uncompromising visionary. But what I really appreciate about what you said there is that idea of conviction. You don't have to be a bulldozer and get to the same end result by leaving a wake of destruction in your path, right? And I think that's kind of that idea of conviction and having that presence and being there and absorbing it with Alexandra and my limited experience of Wing. And I would assume, um, with I don't even know him, but I can't call him. I feel bad calling him Donald, but maybe Mr. Bren. I feel like that maybe that is the idea of conviction, and they have vision, but it's not at the expense of everything else, right?
No, correct. And for me, it even starts earlier. My mother was a big influence because she in addition to being a great designer and a great artist, she also had the she made the effort of creating a professional services design firm in Portugal at a time where that doesn't really exist. It didn't exist as a profession. It was, some people were giving advice to others, but the idea of setting up an actual business, and no, so I grew up with seeing someone trying to create a business where the business itself was helping others find that great place to be, whether it was a home or a restaurant or a hotel. And I do think that there is a tremendous effort that is always a part of getting to what we could call the right answer, right? Out of many, the one that feels the best. And so I do think that all those people have a great resilience to, not deviate from what they think is the right direction, and then to bring people along. So it's really both. It's, they do need to be on their own, the kind of people that do not stop trying to get to a certain place, but also that, even they might create frustration around them, but we're all looking at times for that sense of conviction, right? When, we have all these places we can go to, all these ideas we can develop, and then you have someone who can say, no, if I forget about all of those, you need to focus on this. And sometimes it does take us a while to get there, but when we do, there's a sense of tranquility, right? We're okay. We've overcome that step. All of a sudden, I think that what I've always observed when I see people that are capable of doing that is that all of a sudden, all the things that I thought were equivalent ideas, they're not, and there's one that's actually better.
Right.
And then you look back and you say, why did I think that those were also options for us to study? And it might be that if we had taken those ideas forward, they would still have been great to pursue, but there's one that makes more sense.
Would it be safe to say that in the case of Wing and also Alexandra, having that conviction and knowing and the vision, but also allowing you the space to kind of come around to it rather than that like Starchitect type mentality where it's like everything is left in a trail of dust to get there, right? Is it that they're really good at allowing you, with not just on your own, but also by coaching you or mentoring you or however it is, to help you get to that decision? And they might not even know what that final vision is. They have they do have an idea, but it's somehow they help you, who's actually doing the work, get there, and in a more binary way.
Right. It's, in a way, it's kind of, you become an interpreter, right? I do think that every successful design business or organization where design is a strategic part of the business, I think they always need visionaries who are uncompromising, who push everyone a little further than they would go just on their own. But you also need the people who kind of help interpret and communicate that to the rest of the team. And I'm a big believer that in order to get things done, you need to have a spectrum, to use your word, of people with different capabilities and different levels of experience, because we're continuously bringing the design world along with us, right? And there's young people coming in, and they need to be exposed. They bring in skills that we no longer have, right? I'm seeing all these young people coming into design offices, and man, they just use these tools in ways that feel fantastic in terms of, I just wish I had them when I was their age. But they're also thinking to use them in ways that are different from the ways I would. So, and I do think you need someone that allows the transfer of information between the uncompromising leader and then the people that get the work done. And somehow in my career, I have always found myself in that sort of anchor position. And maybe it is because that's my skill set and that's what I've sort of developed over the years. But I'm able to flex very quickly between being open to the vision of the person who is leading us a little further, and then focusing on what I need to organize and do and prepare for everyone else that is coming along, that is also rowing, to be able to do their work and understand why it is that we need to do what we're being asked to do. Or sometimes, why are we shifting, course correcting, and shifting direction halfway through? And every organization needs to have that kind of capability too. And I think that that's where I found myself, is sort of, having the benefit of being trusted by these great people who have pushed me forward. but also being trusted by the people who actually get the work done, that I'm giving them the direction, the structure, the order that they need to pursue their work.
Hey, everybody. We've been doing this podcast for over 3 years now. And one of the themes that consistently comes up is sustainability. And I'm just really proud to announce that our sponsor, Berman Falk Hospitality Group, is the first within our hospitality industry to switch to sustainable and recyclable packaging, eliminating the use of styrofoam. Please check out their impact page in the show notes for more info. One of the most pivotal business, I call them business porn books, but like one of the most pivotal business porn books I've ever read is called Traction, or EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And in that book, they describe, and it's in any business, right? Everyone thinks, oh, my business is unique, or I'm trying to create this, it's unique. But every business, yeah, might have its own uniqueness, but ultimately there's a visionary. You could call it a CEO, a founder, or whatever, but take all those titles. That titles don't matter in this. But I think what you're describing is perfectly this. There's a visionary, then there's an integrator who could be a COO, a VP, or whatever, or president of whatever. And then there's the functions underneath it. And in a business, it'll be sales, operation, finance. But the visionary is like, okay, this is where I need to go, but you can't do it all on your own. We all stand on the shoulders of those before us. And then the integrator said, okay, well, I have this great crew underneath me. How do I get them? I love I use that also because I used to row, but like, how do I get everyone to row in the same way and have it be effective and seamless and frictionless, and all those things that you described in the beginning about your definition of hospitality was like to feel known, because you have to know the visionary and you got to know your team underneath to really execute. And it's really that it's like a design integrator.
Right. Well, I understand what you're describing. I feel like integrator could be sometimes a little reductive. I'll use another analogy. I think often about the role of a conductor in an orchestra.
Yes.
Where it's you have the stars, you have the people who play those instruments better than anyone else, but then you need to allow everyone to come along and direct them to be able to play the tune, at the same rhythm, same measures. Sometimes you indicate to the back, the guy with the cymbal that only plays every once in a while, but it's really important when that sound comes across, and they need to be brought in at the right time. So I do think that there are elements of it that are similar to what you described and make a lot of sense. But what I've also found is, a lot of my moves professionally have happened at sort of inflection points in the life of these organizations. And what I had to do was use that inflection point, usually was a point of growth, and allow that energy that the leader, the founder, the person that really made sense, around whom the business made sense, to deploy that energy and to channel it in a way that helps the company evolve and grow, and sometimes with big changes that had to occur. So I've always liked the challenge, of interpreting, understanding the visionary, finding the right way to communicate with them, finding the right way to communicate what they are, what they want to achieve to a broader team of people, which, naturally they don't always have the patience to do that, but also make that team understand that they're a part of the adventure we're on, the journey, and that has to lead to growth. And so I've always been sort of, moving back and forth between just harnessing that energy, but at the same time creating a different energy around the people doing the work, so that we can move forward and grow and change and evolve, with all the things that, it's a fast changing world of design and hospitality, as you know, and we can't stop, right? We have to continuously move people forward and bring in new ways of doing things.
I'm curious about those inflection points in areas of growth. Perchance, do they correlate to the credit cycle and recessions?
They did.
Oh, they did. Okay. Wow. Okay. Because I found that, like, I am always in this place of building systems, processes, get everything going, and it's great. And then you're in this good space, and then you get sideswiped, and you're like, crap, how do I adapt? And what is next? And then always out of that pain comes a lot of growth.
Right. And, you know, and I don't want to dismiss the impact that some of those moments, you know, that the way the economy evolves have had in other professions.
Mhm.
But I think we all know that the design professions tend to suffer hugely from those moments because it's just more fragile, right? It's just that tends to not be as prepared and as resilient to withstand those shocks. So, you know, it did happen when I moved from Portugal to New York. It was late 2007. You know, I think we all saw some signs of.
Oh, so you um shut down, or you wound down your company to go work with Alexandra, right?
Yes.
And so you're on this new path. You're moving to New York, 2007. Oh boy.
And at the time,
Wow.
you know, I didn't make the decision because I thought I needed to be out of the environment where I was in. We were still in a period of growth or a belief of growth. And so I really saw that move as, you know, there were a lot of reasons. The job was appealing. I had met Alexandra a couple of times, and I, you know, was really interested in her view of design and what she could achieve with her company. Um, I was I love the idea of bringing my family, you know, out of a smaller environment and, you know, and having them be exposed to a much bigger world. I had always been fascinated by New York. The US in general. You know, I always felt like the size of the economy in the US and the professionalism of the people I knew was really appealing to me. But yes, I did arrive and we landed, and I guess what was it now? Now it's all well, it's blurred, but March 2008, right? Bear Stearns crashed
Right there.
world, and you know, and everyone retreated, and all of a sudden 80% of the business disappeared. I think about 3 months after I joined the company.
So in all of that, it's like tremendous learning, right? Oh, actually, you know what? I feel like when we spoke, you mentioned that recession was like your MBA. Is that possible? Am I making that up?
Right, absolutely. You know, absolutely. And not to say that I learned everything that people learn in an MBA,
More practical experience.
very practical. You know, having taken my first executive level job, you know, running all the sort of the angles of a design firm that did work internationally, and you know, and in a way, having made a promise to the person that had hired me that I would, you know, be an effective member of the team, helping the company grow, and really believing in what I could achieve there. Um, but it was really focused on the learnings I was bringing from before, which was I had built this company with my wife very successfully. You know, we had been successful at creating a culture, a good culture of building up a roster of clients that really trusted us. But all of a sudden, a lot of that didn't really matter because we were in survival mode and there was no business. And the business that was there, we didn't know what was going to happen. And so a lot of my time was spent just making sure that the work we did really well, that the people that we had around us that we really trusted were encouraged and not discouraged, because you know, you can't get good work, good design work, good creative work if people are not able to sleep. And I know a lot of people were not at the time, but you know, I tried to bring an optimism to work every day. And then everything I was learning about, you know, how to you know, keep the money flowing in every month, completing the work that we were supposed to complete, not making any mistakes, continuing to focus on, you know, we did hire some people at the time that we all, you know, at the ownership level of the company felt that could deliver work more confidently and more effectively. And then, you know, there's a little bit of luck there too. You know, there had been some contacts in the company prior to that with, they were already working on a project in China. And, you know, that was a moment where a lot of North American firms were very successful bringing to China a level of expertise that didn't exist there, and they appreciated. And we had 5 years after that of pretty much work being developed, business being developed in Asia, in China, in Japan, in Malaysia, in Indonesia. It was very, very interesting time because, I was trying to figure out how to do business in those places, how to satisfy clients that had a very different mindset and a very different expectation, still making the money come in and making Alexandra feel like her vision could still be deployed at this sort of larger scale, and continuing to encourage the staff that we had a future and that the company was going to be successful. And it was hard work, but and very broad work in terms of everything I had to think about every day. And the company was well set up. There was a board of directors that had, very experienced people who Alexandra had a lot of trust in, who I still to this day think were important mentor for me, because they also believed in my ability of getting the work done. But yes, I was exposed to business in a way that I didn't think was going to happen.
I consider myself so lucky to have gone to China 6 to 8 times a year from 2001 to probably 2018. And to see that explosive growth and at a scale, I mean, the little town I would go to from 2001 onward outside of Shanghai turned into a metropolis and manufacturing I mean, it's just unbelievable the way that the Bund in Shanghai just reshaped it for the World Expo and then the Olympics. And it was like I don't know if anyone, well, I'm sure I don't want to say anyone ever in the future, but like the amount of scale and construction, and just going back to that word scale, is like, I don't know when the next time is that humanity will see that insanity. It was like a sight to behold. And I think that's a really good segue to get back onto the scale talk and from as far as Sands and like how they just like, yeah, they were in Vegas and it started as oh my God, what's that electronic show?
Oh, yes, I know the computer show.
Yeah, the computer, whatever it is. Oh my God, it has the letters. But that was Sheldon Adelson's like first thing, and he sold that, and then grew this hospitality empire and really reshaped Macau. I mean, and southern China.
Right, especially when the Venetian opened in Vegas, that was really something completely new.
CES.
The Venetian was a a new concept of gaming and hospitality and entertainment, sort of all in one, in this sort of fantasy world, right?
But done at such a high level. Like the fantasy world's been done before, but not at such a high level of like insanity. Like just the amount of
floor of a building, right? You don't get that anywhere else.
yeah. I mean, and then so okay, so then coming from Champalimaud and then working with Sands, and I'm really curious because I've only met Wing Chao a couple of times, and for those of you who don't know him, he's like pivotal in like the expansion of just from a hospitality perspective at Disney, and he's just a legend in like a founding father of our industry of hospitality and hospitality design. But it's hard to get your brain around the scale. What are some ways that Wing, because you mentioned that he was really good at helping you see the world through the eyes of others and experiences of others, but how did he help? Like, what are some like actual ways that he showed you that and helped expand your mind so that you could get your head around that scale and execute within that scale?
It started with the way he looked at every design that was presented to him, which was we could have this rendering of a 5-story atrium with a big fountain in the center, and and all these paths leading to different places, and Wing would start talking about the scale of the people that were on the rendering before he would actually start talking about the building itself. And if for some reason the people that were representing on the rendering were not the right type of people that would be in that space, he would be really disturbed by it. Like, these are a guy in a suit with a briefcase, in a little atrium before you enter the gaming lounge. That's not the kind of person you see there.
Oh, that's super interesting. So basically the design could be good, could be bad. It could be the best design ever in the world. Let's just assume it's the best design ever.
Right.
He's focusing on the actual renderings of the people and what they look like. And is that a real representation of the type of person that's going to be walking through the
Right.
space? Holy cow.
That's where he started. I mean, from what my experience was, and maybe other people had different experiences, my experience was that he started with, what are people seeing? How are they experiencing this space? And where are they going? And what does this mean? It wasn't about, hey, we have these great finishes on the walls and there's all this detailing and the lighting and the chandeliers. It was about, what does it feel like to be in that place? And I remember, in one meeting, that was a lesson for me. We were reviewing the work of the interior designers, and I think at one point I made a comment about something. I said, "Oh, I like that." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, this is not about whether you like it or not. This is about, is it right or is it wrong?" And so he had such a sense of, it's not just about, we're not just there, especially in this role. When I moved from Champalimaud to Stearns, I moved from the role of executing design to being the sort of the owner's rep, the person who makes sure the designers are delivering the right product for that business. And I was still, at times it takes a while to make that shift, because you start looking at things a little differently. But there was for him a clear sense that we were not there to think whether we liked it or not. It was really about, is this what we should be doing? And if you start by evaluating the physical manifestation of design in that way, then you just look at things very differently. And that different lens that he used, I think, was a big part of why he was so influential around, and why so often the projects that he was involved with sort of ended up in a place where people felt really good there.
Wow.
It was about, are people queuing too much? Are they waiting too much to move here? When designers were too worried about the physical side of it, he would always look at them and say, "Hey, this is not a museum. This is a hotel. This is not. We're not here to look at the details." And sometimes that's difficult when you come from a place of aesthetic integrity, which was very much my experience before that. It was, I had been involved with historical renovations, and I, because my training was very much informed by sort of the more classic approach to design. To me, everything matters. It's not just the two sides of the wall that you see. It's the whole, the whole architecture, the whole design that needs to make sense. But in his view, that was secondary. It was more about, how do we first create an impression? How do we choreograph the experience that people are having in this hotel through the lobby, into the elevator, into the corridor, into the room? What does a room feel like? How do you compress the spaces in scale so that people still feel good and they feel like their feelings about where they are also changing, right? It's a very dynamic way of looking at design, when sometimes designers are too focused on what does it look like, and that feels static. There is a great value in being able to apply that dynamic look, because then you just end up with something, going back to what I said at the beginning about designing hospitality and it being about that, that impression. You need both. If you don't have both, it's very hard to get to a place where people want to keep coming back. And that's why, maybe people keep going back to Disney, and they have honed that experience over time.
I mean, it worked.
Right. And when you apply that in the right way, to the right properties, this sense of immersion and of emotional connection with the spaces, and for the designers and the people responsible for the project to think about all of the emotional components of what they're creating with their physical ideas, all of that makes a big difference.
I love that. And I never considered it that way, to think about the experience of the actual humans going through and to focus on that first, regardless of what everything is. And to hear that whether it's right or wrong, that's like shocking to me. But I guess if you consider that stakeholder of who's going through it, everything else kind of becomes plain, or it becomes just real, right or wrong. Fast forward to Irvine Company and Mr. Bren. What do I call him? Donald? Mr. Bren?
It's a brand.
Mr. Bren? Mr. Bren. Okay. Mr. Bren, where you're working on things that are of like neighborhood, city, town, like large scale, master planned developments, where it's not just the actual human walking through. There's cars and trucks and deliveries and, you know, just infrastructure. I loved how you talked about that element that of thinking about the actual human walking through and considering that Wing gave you. But what did Mr. Bren from that experience, like, did you pick up anything from him as far as in the same light as how Wing Chao taught you to consider the person and the rendering of the person and the psychographic of the person going through it?
I think the short answer is yes, I did. I think because Mr. Bren is such a thoughtful and educated person, with decades of experience doing, these large scale projects, it takes time to sort of bring, have a full understanding of what we learn from these, from being exposed to people like him. But he had an uncanny ability to zoom out and zoom in a project, and and has the ability to sort of think about how we're transforming this neighborhood and introducing a new road that leads to that particular place, to then 5 minutes later he's looking at carpet patterns that we have inside the corridors and inside the public spaces, and have equally confident opinions about either. And I think that that's incredibly rare for a human being to be able to have that ability to look at the small scale, look at the large scale, and have an equal conviction about both. What he did have in common with Wing, and I think it's goes back to that focus on people, is this idea that for them customer experience is not something that they talk about too much. It just is. It just is the way you think about any building that is being put together for whatever purpose. It's a hotel. Nowadays, for me, it's more the sort of the multifamily developments. But it's this ability of what's the choreography of the users of that, the customers, the users of that building. What do they see when they arrive? When they get to the door, are we leading them in the right direction? That idea of the red carpet that we see in big galas. And the idea of the red carpet was really just to lead people to the entrance without having to think, right? They're in beautiful gowns, beautiful dresses, well dressed up. They're coming out of the limo. They don't want to have to be looking around. Where's the door? Is it there? Is it there? It's the red carpet is what takes them to the entrance, and they don't have to think about it. I read this once somewhere, some designer or architect was doing an object lesson about the red carpet. And I never forgot that. You need to create these visual cues that make it so clear that you know where you're going, that your brain is then able to observe other things and appreciate other things and enjoy being there, because you're not having to spend any mental energy trying to think about the things that we should be making obvious for people as designers and as promoters of a certain physical property.
It's interesting, as you were saying, to not even consider the human or the guest experience, or it is like, that's the idea of table stakes, right? What resonated with me is, when myself or anyone at Berman Falk or any of our reps everywhere, and we do a presentation on like, this is what we do. We rarely talk about quality. Like, that's just table stakes. Like, we wouldn't be in this game if we didn't get that right. And I think that there's so many different industries and professions and vocations where it's really important to know the table stakes, right? I think a lot of people try to come into certain industries and they don't know what the table stakes are. And they spend a lot of time talking about what should just be a given and not about the other things that are probably equally or just as important, but to get to that point where you're not worried about everything else.
Right. Which then has a corollary to that, which is that you should also not be trying to reinvent things that work every single time. There are, especially when you work on a lot of projects over many years, there are things that just work well. And I found that, all of these people I've worked with through my life, and, and it expands beyond this group that we talked about. I've had the privilege of working with great architects, great interior designers, and I think they all have this ability to experiment just enough, innovate just enough, bring in things that are new, but be confident about the things that work. And sometimes it's a matter of scale, sometimes it's a matter of focus on detailing, sometimes it's a matter of, just because you've seen 20 new materials at HD, don't use them all in the next project. Maybe use the ones work, and then add that additional one that is great, but that everyone else is going to use it too. So the ability to also have a sort of a funnel and be the master of that funnel to allow the really good elements of an idea to kind of get through and make it to the project, and then know that some things have to wait for the next one. That's also a great skill. And I don't know if I know how to do that as well, but I have learned over the years. I've gotten better at that. I've gotten better at being patient about the sort of pausing and looking at what we're trying to achieve, and then not being afraid when something is wrong or feels wrong to say, no, this doesn't work. Let's not waste any more time. Let's course correct and move in a different direction.
One of the things that I think would be interesting is, and I'm curious for your experience on this, is so working on these big casinos and hotels and just experiences in Asia with Sands, where there's almost no constraints, right? It's just like I know there's not limitless budget, but it's like, let's just make this an incredible place. It'll be a homing beacon to everyone who wants to come in and have an incredible experience. But from a regulatory perspective, the local jurisdictions there are like, okay, they're full on behind you and supporting you. I'm sure there are some constraints. And then you go on the other side of that to Irvine Company and doing these large kind of master plan developments with infrastructure and different components. And then in California, where there's so many constraints, especially the closer you get to the ocean, I don't know, I feel like it must yield a whole much like an incredibly different type of creativity to work within those regulatory constraints. Like, how can you describe like is there a stark difference, and describe that?
Well, constraints, in my view, are really helpful for creativity, because I think that, when we're able to work within certain boundaries and we have to push everyone around us to do a little bit more, I actually think there's something to it that's good. That whether there are too many constraints or not, I will leave that for another discussion another day. One thing that is important about Irvine Company that I think is worth mentioning is that the company has a philosophy of owning in perpetuity. So every project that we developed, every building that we developed and build is going to be owned forever. These are not speculative developments that, eventually will trade at a valuation at some later date. These are assets that are going to be built and then operated by the company until, a whole new generation of people are around dealing with them. When you have that long-term view, it changes a lot of things about how we plan and we design and we build anything. Thinking long-term allows us to have, be less tied to just solving one problem that's impacted by one regulation here and there, because we're already, in many ways, in order to build these with a long-term thinking, we kind of already have to think about a lot of the limitations that are imposed on us by regulatory constraints, or even by the location. And so I do think that is very unique. Maybe the experience that other people have in California, if they're just sort of more on the speculative side, might be. But for me, it's, I like the challenge. I like the challenge. It does get frustrating at times. And we do wish that some things that no one can explain why we do it that way or have to do it that way needs to be done accordingly. But we do find ourselves being very, very resourceful, and I ask that of my team, and I ask that of every designer I work with. That's what keeps me going back to certain firms and to certain creative people, because they do understand it. And if you create that sense of trust and they understand what they're trying to achieve, we can get a good job. I do notice that it's harder sometimes to bring in people from outside of California to do the work, because sometimes you might go down an avenue that can't be done because of where we are, and sometimes you don't have the time to do that. But that's just part of the trade-offs, of having to get things done and having to get them done in a certain amount of time.
Well, I think all of that is just a testament to your original definition of hospitality, and it's just, feeling known or being known, as you said, because whether it was your own company and the curiosity you had there to start that, or coming to the US, or learning about luxury and working international and navigating through the Great Recession at Champalimaud or at Sands, creating these great things and learning so much under wing, or being at Irvine Company and building and owning in perpetuity. Those are the table stakes. That's really like each of one of those situations. They were all very clear on what it was, what their purpose was, right?
Right. And what I think that also has led me to do is, over the years, create very strong partnerships. I'm not always looking to reinvent entirely the people I work with, or who support our projects on the creative services side, as well as on the vendor side. I do feel that there's an enormous value in developing partnerships of people you can continuously go back to. I feel like there are vendors I've worked with over the years that, through my challenge, have become better at what they do. I have become better because they have also challenged me to look at things differently. And so, and maybe that goes back to the fact that I came to the country without without a network, without a single contact. And I've valued over the years incredibly all the people that I have met, and we go back to the conversation you and I had when we just reconnected recently. It's so important to have that sort of that village of people that are there for you when you need them, but you're also there for them because you keep giving them business and you keep bringing them along, and you give them a sort of a stability and a confidence that wherever you're going to be, there's a place for their product, there's a place for their services. And I'm very vested in the idea of the people that support my work being financially successful. In particular, with interior design firms, I think one of the things I've brought when I transitioned from being a member of a design team to being an executive in a company that hires the services of those firms, is that as much as I push them to do great work, I'm always focused on the fact that are they making money on this project? Are they able with their fee to support their firm to continue growing? Are we asking them to do the right thing? Are we pushing them too hard? I cannot take off that hat, because I know that having healthy, optimistic, confident designers is so important to getting a good project, to getting a good outcome, that I keep moving between one and the other. And when I have the opportunity, I try to mentor young designers. I try to mentor owners of design firms, sharing with them this point of view that I now have from my side of the fence, which I learned a lot from that. That what clients really want, and how do they make their decisions, and the whole process of an idea being presented and communicated in a room where you have the owner, the executive that is the sponsor of the project, the project manager, the person in charge of budgeting, and the finance person, and and then the design team, all of these people have a different view. And when you're a designer, you're having to present to be able to convince people that you have the best idea. One of the things I do with designers often when they're coming in to present to a group is to let them know who's the key person in that room. So when you walk in, you're going to have a lot of faces looking at you, but there's only one that matters. Because ultimately, helping that person understand where we're going is going to be the easiest way to facilitate the decision making. That's decision making in large companies is very, very difficult. It's time consuming. It requires somewhere between conviction and consensus, which done in a good way can lead to a really great place. Done in a bad way can be a disaster. And so I do think that partnership, just going back to that point, having the partnerships to me has been the key of a lot of my success, because I create trust, and then hopefully that those people trust me too, and we can keep evolving together.
I mean, amen to that. And that, again, it's all about feeling known and letting everyone else feel known. And it's a two-way street. Bruno, this has been a magnificent conversation. And I'm so glad to get to know you better through this and dig deeper. Yeah, and feel known. And yeah, and again, everyone, if you're walking down, just make some space. Look to your right, look to your left, take a minute, just like Bruno did, just like I did. Really cool things come out of this. And I just want to say thank you for sharing your experience with our listeners and with me, selfishly. And if people wanted to learn more about you or Irvine Company, what's a good way for them to do some learning or connect?
Well, the easiest way to connect with me would be on LinkedIn, Bruno Viterbo, and then probably a couple other people with the same name, but I think mine shows up right away. I'm as I said earlier, I'm very open to talking to people. I'm very vested in the progress of our profession as interior designers and of the hospitality and the design world in general. And so I'm always open to mentoring, discussing, debating, having all those great conversations to keep moving things forward. And then, there's a social media, Instagram, Viterbo Bruno. You can also find me there. Pinterest, maybe.
Cool.
I try to keep a lot of avenues open to inspire me and to find inspiration. There's almost too much of it these days, but I try to find the right places to get what I think I need, my fix of inspiration to keep me going.
Wonderful. And we'll be sure to keep all those in the links as well after the show. So when you go on there, just click, it'll take you wherever you want to go. But seriously, a heartfelt thank you. I appreciate you so much. And thank you.
This was a pleasure, Dan. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you to all of our listeners. If this changed your idea on hospitality, or thinking about scale differently, or experience being table stakes, or you think someone could benefit from this, please pass it along. We grow a lot by just people sending this to others saying, oh, you may not have considered this, or we were talking about something similar. So please do that, and we'll catch you next time.